So Desta, thank you so much for joining today. We were together just last weekend in London at
Yes, it
an
feels like a
event.
long time ago.
I know, can you believe it? It's gone really quickly, hasn't it, the week?
Now you're in
But
Macedonia. I'm in Chicago.
I know, right? We've just completely separated and gone the opposite way. It's crazy. But we did get on, so it wasn't that we didn't like each other. We didn't just we didn't get on opposite planes and then
It's
disappear.
possible.
No. But what was really cool is I loved what you had to share at those sessions that we had in London. And it just made sense to me to invite you to talk about that at this conference as well. Because I think you just have some really nice things to share about language and music. And I'd like to start there actually. Um, so tell us a little bit about you and the music you do and how that's helped you learn languages, because that's a long story and you could talk for hours, but let's start there and see where we go.
Sure. So about me and the music and the languages. So I kind of just did music at school, really, um, and choir. But I didn't really, I think, until later notice how much it was helping me learn other languages. I kind of fell into professional music when I was about 16, 17. And then I found that if I learned a few songs in French or Portuguese, doing backing vocals for different artists, that I kind of felt much closer to the language and could converse a lot quicker. Even after 12 years of studying French at school, I didn't really feel a connection with it until I started to find music in French I really liked, and work for artists, francophone artists, and so that was how I kind of developed it. I wanted to be a singer, and my mom was like, "Okay, but you're gonna have to you're gonna have to study something else too." So I got my teaching certificates, and so I was doing performing arts and teaching at the same time, and it that's how it developed, and it gave me so many international opportunities. So I really got exposed to even more cultures and more countries, and started testing it out. So it was in 2014 that I officially started Languages Through Music and started workshops in London, in Belgium, at different festivals, and seeing how much it worked for people who weren't necessarily musicians, or also like me felt that they weren't good at languages, whatever that means. So that's how I got to it. So I've done backing vocals for a wide range of artists, and then for my own music, yeah, I play with friends that I've been playing with for ages, and it's brought a lot of travels and friendships and a few languages.
Yeah, I mean, some of the languages as well are languages that people wouldn't really expect. I mean, I've got to be honest, I was probably when with your repertoire, Turkish stood out to me. I think probably because I'm in the Balkans. So
Okay.
it wasn't what I was expecting you to say in the list of languages. Tell me a little bit about your love of Turkish, because I know it did blossom.
Yeah, I went to Istanbul for the first time in 2008, 2009, and I just immediately loved it. I thought it was such an incredible city. The food, the Bosphorus, the islands, the people I met. I was actually, yeah, so I kept on going back, and I did my CELTA certificate in Istanbul,
Mhm.
and I couch surfed, and I made really just wonderful friends. And I just found it so welcoming and such an interesting place. And then I did, a friend of mine was doing backing vocals for a Turkish pop star called Hadise, and couldn't do a few gigs. So I filled in for her. And so, you have to learn about 15 songs for a gig,
Wow.
and you need to get the pronunciation right. And as a backing vocalist, you need to sing correctly, but if you know what the song means, you can emphasize the right way, you can understand where you are, you're not just singing gobbledygook. So I really studied those 15 songs, and some of those songs as well, were covers of older Turkish singers. There's a amazing musician and singer and composer called Sezen Aksu, who'd written some of Hadise's lyrics. So that kind of sent me down a bit more of a research tip. And so yeah, it was just a summer of doing backing vocals for Hadise.
Mhm.
But then I found, even if it's a language I had no exposure to, if I studied, 10 to 15 songs in that language, I was conversational. And then I just really loved the culture and the language, and I decided to do, I had some free time. I decided to do a 1 month course in Istanbul at a school called Termed, and it was 4 hours a day,
Mhm.
immersion, so not a lick of English. And I spent another month in Istanbul, and it's still a city I love. I'm going back there in March. I teach theater festivals for young people, so I'm directing a festival there in March, and I just can't wait. I plan to pack a suitcase for a month, and after the festival just hide out on one of the islands or something, because it's such a great place to be.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. I share your love for Istanbul. It is interesting what you say about, music and learning lyrics and getting into a language. I mean, sometimes, I guess, we think of English lyrics for certain things. How do you deal with what's overly flowery that people don't use? Because obviously, I learned Italian, and I learned a lot with Italian musicians, but some of the words I did find were very poetic. Or if you listen to some English rap, for example, and you were to do it, if you were to speak like some of the rappers speak, it would sound a bit weird. Do you get a feel for that, or have you noticed differences in how that plays out in different countries and music?
Yeah, it's funny. I think for me, two cities stick out in terms of lyrics being really important to them, and
Mm.
it's Brazil and Turkey. It's the only places I've seen where you might be out on a terrace in an evening and a song comes on, and the whole terrace of the restaurant or bar will start singing the lyrics.
Mm.
Oh, young, I was like, wow, that's incredible. And then in Brazil, I learned through kind of popular Brazilian music, and if you look up a song in Brazil, you get the lyrics automatically next to the song. I think it's letras.com.br. And I was like, wow, that's impressive, because not all countries really check for lyrics that much. I think it's important to go through with a friend. I mean, if it's a kind of modern, popular song, it's easy to assume that it's kind of current colloquial language. But if it's like some old melodramatic, uh, tune, then you might have to check with a friend, kind of, do people actually still use this? Or what I like is that music teaches you about the history too. So in Brazil, for example, there was a dictator for a long time, a dictatorship for a long time. So songs from the Tropicalia period, there's a lot of kind of hidden meanings. So
Mhm.
they'll say something, you're like, what on earth does that mean? But then if you know the time period and that artists were being censored, you know that they're trying to say something symbolic.
Mm.
Um, or, some artists got banned, or some artists were too political. There's this singer I love in Turkey called Selda Bajan, and she has this song about, urging journalists to write, and the whole refrain is just write, journalists write, and she's like, don't write about this and that, write about, the meaningful stuff, the important stuff. So
Wow.
yeah, I think it gives you, if you check, it can give you like the most useful language, but also inform you about the history, like why it was written, when it was written, how the country has changed. So yeah, the songs give you so much more than just speaking.
Yeah, there's something you just said there, and it just really stood out to me. Sometimes it's not what they sing about, it's what they don't sing about.
Yeah.
That's really quite powerful, actually, as a thought, especially when you talk about, different regimes and different periods in time, and that's a really telling thing. And during the weekend that we spent together in London, where you were giving the workshops, you mentioned about some cultural things, and you talked about it briefly in the introduction. Can you share some things that really stick out to you that you've learned? And because you mentioned there was a song, and I believe it was from an African country, and they used the word in French for coffin.
Hearse.
The
Yeah.
hearse, sorry, hearse, that was it. And tell us about that. You can share that story, you can share another story. But
Yeah.
I just remember that sticking out to me as well as something I thought, wow, picking up on that kind of cultural nuance and very specialized vocabulary as well. Um, so I mean, how's that been for you? Are there any examples that really stick out, and how's that sort of weaved into your relationships and friendships when you've met people and talked about that kind of stuff?
Um, I think, yeah, music is so, something that stuck out from your talk was about learning useful language. And with music, I think you can easily find the songs that give you like the most useful language, but you can also find the songs that give you the most random language. Um, like there's this Brazilian song by Milton Nascimento where the refrain is literally like a list of different specific types of fish in the Amazon River. So, I was like, what? The whole song about fish? That's incredible. Or so you can use music to find really specific examples. I was giving a talk where I was talking about being publicly corrected and humiliated in a Belgian post office because I used the wrong masculin féminin and about a stamp. And then I was thinking, surely there's no songs about stamps. And you look it up and there's songs about stamps. So there's really songs for everything. So songs are great for, general language, but you can really find a song to teach you anything. But in terms of Zao, I think he's a Congolese artist, and a friend of mine just introduced me to this artist maybe 2 weeks ago, and it's so catchy. But I was listening to the lyrics in French, and I didn't know the word corbillard, and it was the Queen's funeral, and then like so it was kind of funerally kind of week. Every time you turned on your socials or the TV, it was and so I was listening to this song. I was like, what's corbillard? He's like, oh, it's hearse in English. I was like, wow, all these years speaking French and I never knew that word. And then listening to it, it was just, yeah, really philosophical, really universal ideas of life and death and what's important at the end of a life. So I learned all these really incredible words. And also what I found interesting with that particular artist, Zao, was
Mhm.
that at the end of one of his songs, Ancien Combattant, he kind of says it's an anti-war song. And he says, if you see a Senegalese, you say this. If you see a Mauritian, you say this. If you see a German, you say this. And it goes on for minutes and minutes. And he
Mhm.
just goes through so many African languages. And I really love that because I find even in London, as multicultural as London is, it's really hard to find resources for a lot of African languages. So I found that with Tigrinya. My dad's from Eritrea, and I didn't learn Tigrinya really growing up. So it was really when I moved to London 10 years ago, I was looking for classes, and it was so hard to find classes for adults, books for adults. And so for me, music is a kind of ready-made resource, it's accessible, it's there, it's online, it's free. And so if we harness music to help learn these languages that we want to learn, yeah, we're winning. And it brings you closer to people, because if you know the top 10 artists or groups that a country appreciates, it tells you a lot about the country, I feel.
Yeah, I think the what people like, and I think also going back to something you said about what people sing along to as well, and which songs and things, and how popular certain songs will be,
Yeah.
and the times that they're sung and used. I mean, obviously the UK Come On Eileen is associated with Christmas and the parties and things like that, and uh, you've got other things, there's Fairy Tale of New York as well. There's another one that everyone knows at Christmas, but I don't know how much people know all of the lyrics to all of them, or just like you say, just the chorus, the refrain. Um, in the Balkans, we see a lot of that, where they know a lot of songs from the
Mm.
former Yugoslavia. People will still sing along to these songs, and I think, like you say, depends on what's important to each individual country, what they actually sing along to, and why.
Absolutely. I think is it Latvia where they had the singing revolution? And it just sounded like something out of a film. These people just joined hands and sang. And there's a documentary on it. It was the people of Estonia, sorry, protesting against the
Estonia.
Soviet occupiers.
Hmm.
And yeah, so it's a whole singing revolution, which is just incredible. And it was literally like the Estonians singing the Soviets out. So, you know, some countries have really strong connections to music. I'm looking at a record I bought my niece years ago, and it's from the Etiopic series. Let me grab it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Um, you know, so this is a kind of famous series
Okay.
of Ethiopian music. I think it was put out by a French label. And, you know, so everyone thinks it's Ethiopian, but then, you know, if you look into history a bit, you know, from that time, like Eritrea was part of Ethiopia, and then when there was a really long war, so a lot of the artists on these compilations are actually Eritreans, and I didn't really know that until a friend of mine
Wow.
who started something called Eritrean Anthology was kind of breaking it down. He was like, yeah, this guy was actually Eritrean, the producer was Eritrean, so kind of, yeah, music. I think sometimes I get so interested learning the other historical kind of parts, I forget that I'm actually learning the language as well. And that applies, you know, I find that learning other alphabets can be a drag, especially if it's something like Thai. But when
Yeah.
you do it in music, it kind of takes away the kind of stressful, tedious part of that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting when you say you sort of unpick, especially countries like you say with Eritrea and Ethiopia, in the Balkans,
Yeah.
the fall of the Iron Curtain, when you've got Estonia, and I think the name of the song was Esti Mudia Esti Suda, which was this famous song that you mentioned, and that is basically a song that's sung throughout Estonia to this day, and is almost like a national anthem for Estonians. It's like this, and it's a lovely song. I remember the song itself. They actually had it on the course for Estonian that I was studying last year, and so I learned the song, and I don't know if I could sing it now, and I wouldn't embarrass myself. But but I love what you're saying about Eritrean singers and how there is kind of also an unpicking of history, right? And that's a really complex question. And you talking about that with the unpicking of what's been tied together and bound together. Okay, what's ours now and what's yours?
Absolutely. And that's something I really enjoy asking people. So I got a grant for languages to music in 2020 from this festival that I used to do workshops for. And I started a kind of podcast series where I was interviewing different artists and educators, asking them the same kind of 8 to 10 questions about their relationships to language and music. And yeah, you know, you learn so much about history, about, you know, we mentioned at Memrise last week about kind of language justice and injustice and social access and power it unlocks, and, you know, oppression it can solidify. And there's so much in it. um so what's an example I wanted to give you? um Oh, my mind's gone blank. What was the example? Yeah, so in my podcast, you know, I found out things that I didn't know. So about how, for example, Swahili classes were forbidden in Kenya, and are, you know, to the point of like really kids were beaten for speaking Swahili at school. Like, you know, friends my age, or like really, you know, kids were discouraged from speaking their mother tongue even in their own country for so long. Like English was used to really oppress so many people.
Mhm.
um, and or, you know, artists or educators who grew up in, yeah, various countries where there was a dominant language, and then their own languages were really beaten out of them or forbidden at school, or just how people um, grew up. You know, languages are political too. and how
Yeah,
people lived that.
they're often politicized, and I don't know how you feel about this personally, but politicizing and is a language inherently political, or is it politicized by certain people and then made a political thing? Where where does that fall for you?
I mean, I guess it's people. People are always the problem. People are always the problem. You know, the language isn't going around saying, you shall speak me or die. So it's definitely people being the problem, I would say. But yeah, I saw Respond Crisis is, you know, one of your sponsors, and they do some amazing work. Access to interpreters, access to justice, access to translation, because yeah, it most definitely is used politically, and it's, yeah, I think music is so powerful because it's everything, right? It's emotional, it's
Mm,
political, it's power, it's intellectual, it's cultural. You know, if you're a kind of big language geek like us, every learning any language is like, oh wow, awesome, oh wow, awesome. But then, so I thought, but you know, I have friends who grew up as refugees and in refugee camps, and have had really horrible experiences due to language, and associate so much trauma with being forced to learn
mhm,
another language that they will, as soon as they got out of that space, they forget it because they don't want to be speaking a language that they were forced to speak. There's a wonderful literature festival, relatively new, set up in Brussels by a friend of mine. He's Eritrean Ethiopian.
mhm.
He's a writer called Suleiman Adonia, and it's the first time I've been to a literary festival where every language is represented. So he set up a kind of writing lab for refugees in Brussels where they can write in their language. And so on stage, they're all reading poetry that they've written in all these different languages. And there's a basket passed out around with the English or French or Dutch translation, you know, but Belgium is so multilingual. And
Mhm.
it's beautiful because you hear the language in its original form and you read out the translation. And I wish, yeah, I wish in the UK we did more of that, kind of celebrating languages in their entirety, and
Yeah,
opening our ears to just hearing different languages.
absolutely. And I mean, you and I obviously we've got a number of similarities actually in our lives. Um, and I think, you know, that was one thing that struck me when I met you in person last weekend, is how much we actually have in common in terms of upbringing, language loss, and even language gain within the family through our Thai families. And there's so there's it's actually quite funny, isn't it, how they sort of converge, and how I can see a lot of things that I've experienced in you, and I hope you can identify the same things in me. Um, I do want to talk about one aspect of that though, because you, like me, had to go back and reclaim a language. You said your dad didn't speak to you in Tigrinya, and you've gone back and reclaimed that. How's that process? Yeah, how's that process been for you though?
Hellish, hellish, awful. It's been really, actually, I won't swear, but awful. Um, Definitely awful. It's, yeah, because I think part of the reason I try to learn so many other languages is just to compensate for not speaking Tigrinya properly. Um,
Mhm.
no, it's been awful. I really wish, like all of my friends now who speak a language that their kids don't speak, I really push them to, you know, really speak to that kid in the language, because I find it, yeah, quite difficult, because also there's so much emotional charge, you know. For Turkish, there was no emotional charge. I was like, la la la, I'm doing some backing vocals. I like the city. I learned the language, you know, and I speak 2 words of Turkish, and everyone's like, mashallah, oh my God, you're a
Yeah.
genius. But with Tigrinya, because I'm Eritrean, and my dad was like the poet laureate, and I speak this awful pidgin monstrosity, I feel embarrassed. I
Oh,
feel stupid. I know it's
oh,
awful. It's
I feel terrible for you.
it's
Oh,
awful. So I think that's my constant quest. But at the same time, it can be really disheartening because What did Chase say last week? He was like, "You'll never be a native speaker."
Oh no.
Some teacher had told him that, and I was like, "Yeah, that's such a drag." So yeah, there's no pressure with the other languages. You know, even though I was born in Thailand, no one's gonna look at me and be like, "Oh, she needs to speak Thai." So if I speak any Thai, it's kind of a bonus.
Yeah,
Even though I was born in Krung Thep.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, with Tigrinya, it's hard. People are like, "Oh, you don't speak Tigrinya?" Oh, or you know, I try, and they're like, "Oh, wow, that's some struggle Tigrinya." And then if they know who my dad is, actually, this, funnily enough, the sweater I'm wearing was sent to me by this lovely person in Arizona. They have something called Peace and Love Tribe. It's their own
Mhm.
clothing company. A young
Yeah.
Eritrean American who loves my dad's poetry so much. They printed out one of his poems in English
Wow.
and one of the poems in Tigrinya. I don't know if you can see the
Oh my
Tigrinya.
word.
Yeah, and they just sent it to me all the way in London in May.
That's so sweet.
Yeah,
I,
so it
I,
was so sweet.
I've got to say, I love the way you said that because I hadn't realized your dad was a poet laureate. Because no pressure,
No
you know.
pressure. Yeah, his name was Dr. Risam Haile, and I have
Wow.
his audio in Tigrinya on SoundCloud. But it's so nice. I mean, he passed away in 2003, but there are still these young people in the world who really love his poems. And he was against the Eritrean dictator, and he read the poem in a kind of really poems in a musical way. You know, they were really rhythmic, really like earworms, like really catchy. So it's wonderful because it's kept my father alive for so many years. But
Yeah.
yeah, it is definitely extra pressure. So I wish he had just taught me Tigrinya. To be fair, we weren't living in Eritrea. We'd go back and visit, and we were living in countries that didn't necessarily have a big Eritrean community. But yeah, to all the parents out there umming and erring of whether to teach the child their mother tongue, just teach them the mother tongue. And I'm also cross with my mother and my sister too, because we left Thailand when I was 3. And so I lost all my Thai and I only started getting it back during lockdown. And then I was like, my direct family spoke Tigrinya and Thai. And they left those two like killer difficult languages for me to learn later. Why? Why would you do
Yeah,
me
I
like
know,
that?
right? Because you know you can speak and they can if a child decides not to bother with a country or a language, they can make that choice later, right? But if you cut off that choice, you cut off that choice, and it becomes a lot more of a, like you say, a nightmare to try and reclaim it. And you know, and you're not dealing with you know, I was only dealing with Welsh, and that wasn't that's really
That
really
can't be
easy.
a walk in the park either, though.
No, simple. Welsh isn't that
Really?
difficult. No, to speak to communicate in Welsh isn't. I mean, I'm not going to be poet laureate, but but to be conversant in Welsh isn't a big thing, and
Hmm.
especially if you. I mean, I grew up on the border, so I wasn't as far removed either from that heritage,
Mhm.
so it was still around. But it is interesting because within a family, even a siblings can have very different feelings towards this that type of thing. Do you have any
Absolutely.
siblings that weren't bothered about not speaking and didn't feel the need to reclaim it as well? Did you have members of the
Mm,
family like that?
I mean, I had a blended family. So my family's Yorkshire and Thai and Eritrean. And so we had a big kind of linguistic mosaic at home. My dad spoke about 11 languages.
Wow.
My mom spoke 3 languages and my sister spoke 3 languages. So I don't know how I ended up so monolingual until 16, 17, but English was kind of the common language for us all. And a lot of my Eritrean family moved to the States as refugees, and so English became their de facto language. Some of them had lived in Ethiopia before, so they spoke Amharic more than Tigrinya.
Mhm.
My sister's Thai family all speak great English, so English just kind of overtook everything. But yeah, I do tell my mom off to this day. I'm like, why didn't you just speak to me in Thai? Or why didn't my dad just speak to me in Tigrinya? I'd have like really much better Thai and Tigrinya. Those aren't the 2 languages you want to start later in life, unless you just accept that, as our friend Chase said, you'll just never be a native speaker and be okay with that.
Yeah, just be okay with it. Exactly.
Yeah, I'm lucky in that I'm not a major perfectionist at all.
Hmm.
And if I can get by and have a basic conversation, I feel quite pleased with myself. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, look, poet laureate's a big and is an Everest to climb, right? So
it's
measuring yourself against that yardstick, I think, is more than even just native. It's
yeah,
that's
it's
native plus plus
intergalactic.
plus plus plus, right? It's like kind of
Yeah,
aiming.
really.
You look, I mean, what a great legacy, and I'm sure there must be a different feeling and connection whenever you learn new things in Tigrinya as well. It must, as there was for me with learning Welsh, it felt very different to learning other languages because
Absolutely. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's a musician, incredible musician, Shingi Shoniwa, and she's from Zimbabwe. And we were having this conversation about how there's really a spiritual element to languages too, especially when it's a heritage language, when it's a language that connects you to your family. You know, as you will well know, like, you know, once you get into the intricacies of language, it's so much. I mean, you're talking about concepts of time, concepts of respect, of relation, of power, of like you're talking about some major things once you start, you know, delving into a language. So there's really a spiritual element that comes with, yeah, I think reclaiming your family languages. I remember, you know, sometimes I go to Bangkok and I've been going my whole life, and I get there and, you know, sees the airport guy sees that I was born in Bangkok, and he's like, put pasatai. And I'm just like, oh no, mit noi kata. So I was so happy in lockdown to start, yeah, reclaiming Thai, because being born there, that's one of my, I'm having my sister who's half Thai, and my niece whose house I'm at right now in Chicago, she's Thai. So yeah, it makes you feel like more involved, I
yeah,
guess.
yeah.
Yeah.
What a beautiful way to round up this chat. I really enjoyed talking to you and going down this road of language discovery through music, through ancestry, through travel, through all these different ways of getting in touch with language and culture.
Thanks
I
for having
hope,
me.
yeah, well, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and I hope that your message to anyone out there listening, please make sure you pass on your language so that at least there's a choice.
Yeah, and get involved in the music. You know, I've
Absolutely.
gotten so much more out of records than I have out of textbooks. So I hope
I love your
people
message.
take that too. But thanks for having me, and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you very much. And we will put some links in so people can find you as well on social media.
Wonderful.
Take care. Have a lovely day there in the
Thank
US.
you.
I will look forward to seeing you again, hopefully in person again in London or elsewhere. And thanks again, Desta.
Thank you, Richard. Take care. Have a
See you
great
soon.
day.
See you. Bye bye.
Bye.